Welcome to the China Desk Podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire, with your host, Steve Yates.
Welcome to the China Desk Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Yates, Senior Research Fellow for China and National Security at the Heritage Foundation. A reminder to our audience, for whom we are most grateful, viewers can watch the China Desk on YouTube or subscribe to hear all our interviews on Apple, Spotify, and most other podcast providers. We welcome you to check out our website and show archive at ChinaDeskPodcast.com. You can also access our podcast at TheFederalNewsWire.com. My guest today is Rushan Abbas, founder and executive director of the Campaign for Uyghurs. Rushan started her activist work in the 1980s when she organized and led pro-democracy demonstrations in Xinjiang University in 1985 and 1988. In 1993, she founded the California-based Uyghur Overseas Student and Scholars Association, the first such Uyghur association in the United States, and served as the organization's first vice president. This organization helped play an important role in establishing the Uyghur American Association in 1998, where she was subsequently elected vice president of UAA for 2 terms. When Radio Free Asia launched its Uyghur service in 1998, she was the first Uyghur reporter to broadcast daily to the Uyghur region. Since that time, Rushan has spent 20 years working across the globe in global business development, international relations, and government affairs. In 2017, Rushan founded Campaign for Uyghurs to advocate and promote human rights and democratic freedoms for Uyghurs and mobilize the international community to act to stop human rights atrocities in East Turkestan. Rushan, welcome to the China Desk. Let's jump in. So I gave a little bit of a hint in our pre-show that with each episode, we like to get to know a bit about our guests. We want the audience to know the person before we jump into the subject matter. I don't want to do anything that is awkward or will get anybody into any trouble, but talk a little bit about what life was like when you were growing up, the things you thought you might do when you grew up, maybe a little bit of color about the kind of some happy memories from your childhood and the formative experiences before you became a world-famous advocate for your people.
Thank you, Steve, for giving me this opportunity to talk about the Uyghurs and our beautiful culture and our history and why we are facing this mass atrocity of this century. I was born, raised, and educated in Urumqi, the capital city of East Turkestan. We called our homeland East Turkestan because that is geographical and the symbolic and the historical name. And the name Xinjiang was given to us from the colonial, the Chinese nationalistic government or Manchurian dynasty, or whenever the occupation began. Since the 1949 establishment of the People's Republic of China, our homeland is being called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, only on the name only, the autonomy, but in reality, the Uyghur people are facing oppression, being treated as a secondary citizens in our own homeland. So I was born in 1967, which is right in the middle of the Great Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. As I mentioned earlier, since Mao Zedong's People's Republic of China establishment and since Mao Zedong's occupation of our homeland, the government has tried relentlessly to destroy the Uyghur culture, religion, and our identity. Our people, the Uyghurs, were persecuted under the different labels, but in 50s, Uyghurs were oppressed and persecuted under the name of nationalists. And then 60s, in the Cultural Revolution, when I was born, Uyghurs were targeted as counter-revolutionaries. That's when my grandpa was targeted as one of the Uyghur intellectuals, and he was in jail for 3 years. And then my parents, being Uyghur intellectuals from Xinjiang University, they were always taken away from home. So my early childhood memories are always like the stories of horrific times that my grandpa was in jail, the torture that he faced, and all the oppression that my parents and their friends and our families and relatives were subject to. Then fast forward to 2001, 2002. After the 9/11 tragedy in the United States, the Uyghurs immediately became terrorists, and China claimed that it's a victim of war on terrorism. So I came to the United States in 1989. I was 21 years old. And when I came to US, I left my family, my parents, my friends, my home. I came to a country without knowing the language, without knowing the people, without knowing the culture. But I found something that we never had: freedom and democracy. And now, with this recent mass incarceration of the millions of Uyghur people and the China's transnational repression, silencing the international community, I feel that the freedom and democracy in the United States is being at stake. And that's why I am trying everything I can to advocate for Uyghurs' rights, also at the same time for the future of the free world that we will be leaving behind for our children and our grandchildren. I don't want them to go through what I have been through as a young child.
Right. Well, I asked you to share some happy memories. Those weren't happy, but they were true. And I really, really appreciate you sharing with our audience what the arc of those decades was for you personally, because it's a window into what it was like for more than just an individual. And so maybe we start there a little bit with the story of the Uyghur people. Of how many people are we talking about usually? When people hear about up to possibly 1 million people in concentration camps or prisons or reform through labor, whatever the words are people want to use, they're incarcerated. That is 1 million out of how many million people?
Yes, thanks, Steve. That is a very important point, actually, because the Chinese government's data and the annual statistics for the different ethnic groups. Recently, the numbers, they were saying 11 to 12 million for Uyghur population. And that is while they implemented the 2 children policy for Uyghur people, and anybody who has 3 or 4 or more kids, that they are not being registered. So you have less numbers as a population. For example, my husband, there are 7 siblings, and I think only 3 of them are being registered, and 4 of them are not. So majority of the Uyghurs populated area, we have a huge population discrepancy because of that. So according to Uyghur intellectuals, the Uyghur population during the 2016-2017 was 18 to 20 million. Mm-hmm. However, Victor Gao, one of the Chinese propagandist or Chinese Communist Party's mouthpiece from China Globalization, when he was being interviewed by Al Jazeera after the mass incarceration of 3 million people, he just throws this number without any relevance. He says, "Oh, I know there are 6 or 7 million Uyghurs living happy lives in Xinjiang." Or, "Oh, how come you are saying 1 million out of 6 or 7 million Uyghur population?" So he actually, someone sitting in Beijing, working very closely with the Chinese government, he knows very clearly the Uyghur population is 11 to 12 million. Why is he writing off 5 million there and saying 6 or 7 million? That should raise immediate attention but I don't think the international community was really watching.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of problems with the international community in terms of what they are willing to see and what they're willing to talk about, and even how to get their head around the situation. So, sort of gradually getting our heads around the situation. You talked a little bit about the population. Let's talk about territory. When we talk about East Turkestan, that would be a region and a culture and a people that existed before the People's Republic of China, before the Republic of China. And these people, in most accounts, are a part of the broader Pan-Asian to European trade route that would have included into the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire would have had some impact in engagement in that region. The Mongolian Empire would have had some engagement into that region. Talk a little bit about when we say East Turkestan is it a well accepted traditional geography? Is it part of a bigger piece? So when people think of an East Turkestan, they must think there's a West Turkestan.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. That is a great point. The East Turkestan is actually located in the north and the west part of People's Republic of China. Size-wise, it's 1/6 of entire China. And if we compare, it's about 4 times of California. And the East Turkestan has been a prominent center of commerce for more than a couple thousand years. If you look at the ancient Silk Road, that starts in the heart of East Turkestan, actually. Marco Polo went there as a part of his journey to Central Asia. And it gave birth to many civilizations and the various points in history, and has been called the cradle of scholarship, culture, and the power. We, as you see at my look, when I travel around, people try to guess where I'm from. Many of them, try to say if I am from Turkey or Italian or Portuguese or, from Central Asia. So, yes, actually, we have closer linguistic, cultural, and the historical ties to those former Russian republics. So we have closer ties to former Soviet republics like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, and the Turks in Turkey, actually, they moved from us. So when we go to Turkey, the Turkish people say that we are the original Turks. We speak the language that's very close to Uzbek, Kazakh, and the Azari, Turkmeni, and the Turkish. So Manchus dynasty invaded our homeland in 1876. And they give this colonial name, Xinjiang, which means new border or new territory.
And I'm glad you made that point, because I wanted our audience to understand that, because most people don't speak Mandarin and they don't read Pinyin, and they'll say this word Xinjiang, and they don't really grasp that in Mandarin Chinese and in written Chinese, it's essentially a cultural admission that this has not been anciently part of theirs. It is something new. It is a new frontier. It is a new boundary. In other words, it's an admission that it was something taken not that long ago.
Exactly. So, territory-wise, it's 1.2 million square kilometer. That's not a small area.
Big.
Yeah, and they also many times, I face people asking me why the oppression or why this current mass incarceration or full-fledged active genocide. Well, because my homeland actually sits on the 1/3 of China's natural gas and the oil reserves, and 40% of China's entire coal reserves, and the highest concentration of fossil fuel reserves of any other region in China, and high in precious metals and minerals such as uranium, gold, and the jade, and it produces 84% of China's high quality long fiber cotton output. So those are the reasons that the natural resources and the geopolitically, geographically, it is an important piece of land as it's a gateway to Central Asia, Middle East, and the Africa and Europe. And when Xi Jinping came to power, and when he introduced in Kazakhstan the One Belt One Road, which now calls the Belt and Road Initiative, in 2013, his policy is basically get rid of the people and keep the land, because our homeland became the epicenter of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, it is a terribly sad assessment because you're quite right. The Communist Party government absolutely does not value the people. The civilization is not protecting them. It's extractive. And so let's talk a little bit about the people who are in East Turkestan, Xinjiang, under the People's Republic of China, who are not Uyghur. There are some, and their numbers have grown in recent decades, and not entirely by accident.
When I was growing up, the population is more like 75% Uyghur and the 25% Chinese. And we do have some, other Turkic ethnic groups like Kazakhs and the Uzbeks and Kyrgyz. But recently, with mass resettlement of Han Chinese to the region, while government is incentivizing their move, offering them money, housing, and the jobs, we have millions of Han Chinese people are coming. And for the local people, racism and cutting edge technology are being used to exert control over an entire Uyghur nation. And if we compare with ubiquitous security like George Orwell's 1984 is basically, omnipresent all over the East Turkestan. Streets are filled with cameras equipped with facial recognition software and iris scanning, and the GPS tracking devices on every Uyghur person's vehicles. Also, QR scanning codes implemented on Uyghur people's homes. The most appalling and the shocking policies are actually forced marriage. Uyghur women are forced to marry. Those the Uyghur women are forced to marry those Han Chinese settlers. And if the girl says no for such a forced marriage because of any reasons, because she's not ready to get married, or she doesn't want to she's not ready to get married, or she doesn't want to marry this particular person, and then herself, her siblings, her parents, everybody was sent to the concentration camp in the name of Islamic extremists. They don't want to marry Han Chinese men. And also, this is not something that I am saying, Steve. This is according to the Chinese state media. According to the Chinese state media, 1.1 million Han Chinese cadres, mostly male, deployed into Uyghur homes, live inside of the Uyghur houses and monitor and supervise their daily lives. While most of the Uyghur men are in the concentration camps or in the prison or at the forced labor facilities as slaves, Uyghur women, their wives and daughters are subject to sexual abuse inside of their own home. Over 1 million Uyghur children are taken from their families, sent to state-run orphanages. The Uyghur women are subject to forced sterilizations, forced abortions. The Uyghur birth rate dropped down to 0%, some of the most Uyghurs populated areas. And the Chinese embassy in the United States congratulated those genocidal efforts by publicly tweeting and saying, Uyghur women are emancipated after implementing reproductive policies. Now the Uyghur women are no longer baby-making machines.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Well, there's a tremendously long list of those things that resonate with two unspeakable parts of human history. One is the Holocaust, and the other is the Cultural Revolution, the era in which you were born. During the Cultural Revolution in the People's Republic of China, violence and disruption and just ugly destruction of institutions and people occurred in not just minority communities, but also in Han Chinese communities too. But most people, when thinking about modern China, post-reform era China, they consider that as the break with the Cultural Revolution. But what you're describing now, and as you rightly said, it's not just your account. This is widely reported in multiple sources, multiple languages and cultures, that what we're seeing now is a modern Cultural Revolution being enacted in this territory. And it is stunning, the number of elements of it that are similar to what people describe as the Holocaust. Now, we have to be extremely careful. One is always warned against making reference to the Holocaust because that was so vile, so disruptive, and yet that is what's happening to the Uyghur people now. You're talking about genocide, not just declared by Republican administration, also a Democrat administration in the United States, and not just by the United States, others around the world. How do you come to terms with having been born and raised, and you have friends and loved ones you very clearly, in your heart and your mind, still very, very much identify with your place of origin and people of origin? How do you put your head around the reality of today? This is what's happening in a world that has said repeatedly, never again.
Steve, you described very eloquently there the genocide of the Jewish people and the Holocaust, and how we should be careful in comparing what's happening to Holocaust because it's so horrific. But when I go around and give presentations and speeches and they describe what is going on to Holocaust museums or Jewish interfaith communities, I try to respect that, and I try to not to call it genocide by replacing it to Uyghur atrocity, replacing concentration camps to the internment camps. But they usually say it 100% of the times. They say that this is genocide. This is what our grandparents, our people went through. And there is a vow never again. But how come the world community is not speaking out or taking strong steps or actions to stop this? During the Holocaust, the democratic countries around the world, they continuously did business with Nazi Germany in the name of economic benefits, and they just turn their blind head. They were like blindsided to what Nazi Germany was doing, what Hitler was doing to Jewish people. But later, they claimed the ignorance. They hid behind the ignorance and said information flow was too slow and they didn't know it. Also, they knew what was happening. They just couldn't give up the money that they were making. But this is 21st century. There are so many documents, Chinese government's own leaked documents, We have victims, former camp victims, and in January 2021, the United States Department of State declared China's actions to be genocide. Since then, we have 12 other countries and the parliaments passed the resolution affirming this. And also, August 31st, 2022, the United Nations Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights documented and reported and released detailed report which describes systematic torture, mass arbitrary detention, forced sterilization, forced labor, and the child abduction, family separations, which are the elements of Geneva Convention's description of crimes of genocide. And their report concluded that these actions may constitute international crimes, in particular, crimes against humanity. Yet, we have so many countries and governments are continuously having benefit from the Uyghur slaves and continuously continuously using the Uyghur forced laborers, the modern slaves, to their supply chains. And, when you look at so many famous people, Hollywood celebrities, NBA superstars, CEOs of the companies, or famous talk show hosts, usually so vocal against any social injustice, rightfully they should. But where are they? Where are those voices when something like this, what I have just described, is happening to Uyghur people? Where are the feminists when Uyghur women's bodies are being the battleground of this genocide? Where are the children's rights defenders when 1 million children are taken from their families and sent to state-run orphanages? When you speak against the CCP, the Chinese Communist regime, there is a consequence. If it's easy to speak and criticize when you don't face any consequences, but if you stay quiet because of the economic benefits that you are getting, what does that mean? What happens to the freedom of speech and freedom and democracy? Well, I am paying the consequences myself. I spoke out what was happening in September 2018 in the United States. I participated on a panel at Hudson Institute, and I was speaking about China's genocidal policies, outlining fate of my in-laws, and that was televised. 6 days after that public speech, the Chinese government went after my sister. My sister is a retired medical doctor. She was just living a very simple, ordinary life. She's not the activist or she's not the outspoken person. She was just a kind, quiet, ultra-worthy person, law-abiding citizen that living in Urumqi. But now she's in jail for the last 6 years. Basically, my freedom of speech in the United States as an American citizen cost my sister's freedom. So today, if I'm going around the world, raising awareness, speaking against this horrific atrocity that my people are facing, I am doing that at the cost of my dear sister's freedom.
Yeah. Well, I greatly appreciate you sharing that very personal testimonial on it, because it's very, very important for people to realize the principal point you made. This is not just a gratuitous campaign of differing opinions. There are real costs and you're feeling them, and our heart goes to you because I am sure it breaks for your sister's situation. Now, let's pivot just slightly into the area that is more on policy and what should be getting done and what others are doing or not doing. There in the United States, there has been an act passed by Congress that is supposed to guard against Uyghur forced labor manufactured products entering into the United States marketplace. And there's supposed to be penalties attached to that, some reporting requirements. I definitely would like to get your sense of how you see that as having rolled out. Is it a step forward? Is there progress we can measure yet, or still too early?
Yes, it is extremely important for us to avoid products that link to forced labor, and it's against our constitution, against our conscience, to use the goods manufactured by Uyghur slaves. So we do have the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that's being implemented, but there are some loopholes in this legislation. And there's a de minimis clause. Any goods manufactured in, any goods shipped actually less than $500 are not subject to this legislation.
Yeah.
So it is important for us to watch the companies like Shein and the Temu shipping millions of small shipments, and they are bombarding the United States consumers with cheap goods that's being manufactured by my people. When we use those goods, and we are actually being not just complicit with this genocide, but we are also being the enablers of this genocide, because we are helping the Chinese government, China's economy, to murder more people and to continuously making profit out of this genocide. So it's extremely important. We do have another legislation to close those loopholes called Uyghur Forced Labor Disclosure Act that's supposed to address that kind of de minimis loophole, but that's being passed in the House and is sitting in the Senate. So we really need to make sure that I would like the audience to call their senators and asking them to pass this legislation immediately to address. And
It's a very important action item because it, of course, is very important on the Uyghur forced labor side of things. It also is front and center in the fentanyl scourge. And there are a number of other areas where this de minimis loophole has been hurting humans on the Uyghur side of this, and also on the American receiving end of it too. So a really important action item for us to take up in the new Congress for sure. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, one of those curiosities I flagged early on, and that is I spent a little bit of time traveling and talking to people in the broader Middle East, talk about East Turkestan somewhat being the origins that ends up becoming Turkey, going across the old Ottoman Empire. But we don't hear Turkey speaking up that much about the Uyghur situation in international bodies or to the government of China. And across the broader Middle East, voices are not focused on this area of communist Chinese oppression of a people you would think they would have natural sympathy for. What has your experience been with that? And is there anything you can help shed light on for those of us on the outside to understand why that is the case?
Yes, that is a very important point, Steve, and that's our frustration too, that there's like 1/4 of the world population, almost 2 billion people are Muslims, and there are many countries in Central Asia and Turkey that we share similar language and the historical ties, but we don't hear that the Uyghur cause is being raised. There are a few elements to this, actually. One is, while the Chinese government is calling the religion, especially Islam, is a mental disease, and the burning millions of copies of Holy Quran and demolishing thousands of mosques. 8,000, over 8,000 mosques are being demolished, to be exact. But they are going and building the largest mosque in Algeria, while they are persecuting Uyghurs and they making every aspect of Islam, every normal practice of religion illegal, and even saying salam alaikum, which is like most peaceful way to greet each other, peace be with you, even saying that is being criminalized. People are facing persecution or jail terms or taken to the concentration camps if they even use that to greet to each other. And then they are turning around and they're screaming for Palestinians need to live with human dignity. And they are trying to act like they support the Muslims' rights in Gaza. This is the hypocrisy. Do you think they really support the Palestinians? Do you think the Chinese government is really caring about Muslims? No. Actually, they are just trying to keep that front quiet while they are dealing with manipulation and the infiltration and the transnational repression with the West. They are just having the Muslims on their back. Because of the power of the Belt and Road Initiative and because of the backtrack diplomacy and the providing technology and also security, surveillance systems to those Muslim majority countries, while manipulating the general public with disinformation and the false propaganda, they are just basically keeping the entire population of the Muslims in the dark. We have been traveling around some of the Muslim majority countries and working with some of the interfaith groups and the Muslim groups. Majority of them, they don't know the details of what the Chinese government is doing to Uyghur people. So we have a lot of work to do. We need to educate them. My husband, actually, Abdul Hakim Idris, wrote a book and published in Arabic, in Turkish, in Bahasa language, which is spoken in Indonesia. And the name of the book is Menace, China's Colonization of the Islamic World and the Uyghur Genocide. And he talks about how the Chinese government is actually little by little colonizing and then manipulating all the Muslim world while cooking the frog in warm water, just the feeding them little by little with, trying to manipulate them and trying to look like that they support them or support the religion. In reality, they are using our homeland as a testing ground so they can control the entire world the way that they are doing it in East Turkestan. That's why, I always say, unless if we educate ourselves, unless if we start to take action quickly, then it will be our children and our grandchildren who will pay the consequences of an illiberal world. If we don't speak now, then the only voice to speak will be one of regret. And we are all responsible for what happens next.
Well, you described it earlier in our conversation, and I just want to echo that because I think you've raised a very, very important point again, that the area that the wider world calls Xinjiang is, in fact, a proving ground for a lot of these technologies, a lot of these tools that are, in fact, tools of control and oppression. And basically, the Uyghur people are being used as test rats, guinea pigs, whatever the uncomplimentary analogy would be, where these things are being tried out to prove the concept. And the Communist Party is, in fact, exporting some of these things, whether it's facial recognition algorithms, drone technology and applications, But a world without any privacy, without any freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And that, I think, is something most human beings don't want to believe is possible, much less happening. But your testimony, along with many others, is telling us otherwise. It's real. It's now, and you're exactly right. It's going elsewhere, and a lot of these Belt and Road Initiative countries are going to find these things coming to them too. Their governments may not care, but their people should, and certainly their faith leaders should. That, I think, is the most troubling part of this all the way around. But Rushan, we don't have unlimited time. I wish we did, because I could probably talk to you all day. I think that this is a really interesting and important subject matter. I know that the audience will appreciate it, and I certainly love talking about religion, cultures, histories, and all of those kinds of things. And your homeland is at the crossroads of so many of those things, which should make it an area of celebration, not one of lamentation or sadness. So I hope that we might be able to rally some awareness in our small way. Clearly, education that you're doing is the first most important step, and we all need to get our private sectors and public sectors to take this more seriously, and they won't if we don't tell them that it matters to us. But can you talk a little bit about your organization as we come to kind of a close? I want to make sure people know where to go to follow your work, follow your advocacy, learn more, maybe even through you, learn more about your friends and fellow associations that are doing this work on behalf of the Uyghur people. But talk about the campaign for Uyghurs and when you started that, what it's about, how it fits in with this broader mission.
Yes, thanks, Steve, for recognizing the importance of getting to know and understand what's happening to Uyghurs today. We established Campaign for Uyghurs in 2017 when this mass incarceration started, to raise awareness, educate the general public, and share the information, and advocate at the Hill for legislation to address what's happening, and also to educate and empower Uyghur youth and the Uyghur women and lead them to become advocates. And we have been doing this for last 5-6 years. It is important for people to, especially general public, to educate themselves about the Uyghur genocide, about the Uyghur people, culture, and the heritage. You can go to our website and they get those information. There are parts about the description of who the Uyghurs are, history, and the culture, and also subscribe to our mailing list and our social media accounts to get frequent updates on what is happening today, and also share what you learn with your friends and family. Awareness matters, and that's what we are trying to do: raise awareness, educate the general public, and establish grassroots movement so people can take a step to address this mass atrocity of the century. So our website is campaignforuyghurs.org, and our social media is also Campaign for Uyghurs on Instagram and the X and the Facebook. And mine is Rushan Abbas on Instagram and X and Facebook. So it is extremely important for people to amplify our voice and also learn more about the Uyghur forced labor and the, I ask your consumption habits to make a change, and they also address companies who are continuously using Uyghur slaves for their supply chains. And people can visit, actually, we belong to coalition called End Uyghur Forced Labor Coalition, and the Campaign for Uyghurs is one of the steering committee members. of this organization, where people can learn about which brands and industries are tainted with Uyghur forced labor. And please make your voice heard when shopping. Avoid products that are mostly likely to be made with using Uyghur forced labor, especially things like clothing, agricultural products, solar panels, electrical vehicle components. And actually, I just want to make one more point here. Heinz ketchup that we see everywhere, they use the tomatoes handpicked by Uyghur slaves. And when we talk about clean energy, solar panels are made by Uyghur slaves. So it's extremely frustrating to see the Chinese government is deliberately using Uyghur forced laborers to those supply chains to make everyone, you, me, and those companies are complicit with Uyghur forced labor. So with Campaign for Uyghurs, we are trying to amplify the voices of the Uyghur people, voices of the victims, and spread the words and raise awareness.
Well, Rushan, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know it's been a long day for you. You've been busy in Europe and you've come back to the United States, and we're still willing to sit down and talk with us and our audience at length on a lot of things for us to think about and action we need to take. But just really can't thank you enough for taking that time. For our audience, if you enjoyed today's China Desk conversation, please tell your friends. Consider subscribing and visit ChinaDeskPodcast.com. Thank you for joining, and a special thank you to Rushan Abbas for sharing her perspective. Until next time, I'm Steve Yates, your host here at the China Desk.
Thank you for listening to the China Desk podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire and hosted by Steve Yates. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.